fellow deep diver. You guys really seem to be digging into the red pill stuff lately, and especially how it applies to marriage. So we found an interesting book for this deep dive that claims to like expose this hidden face of feminist ideology.
Yeah.
It gets pretty controversial.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But I think it's really going to get you thinking about the historical forces at play, you know, in relationships and in society.
It's a deep dive into like the psychology of relationships for sure.
Yeah.
And it touches on some really sensitive.
Oh, yeah.
I think it'll challenge a lot of assumptions people have.
Yeah, like one of the first things that jumped out at me was how the author connected these classic psychological complexes, you know, Oedipus Electra, to like modern day feminism.
Right.
And I know those terms get thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
The book kind of breaks it down in a way that I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, the basic idea with the Oedipus complex, you know, is that a young boy develops this like unconscious attraction to his mother and sees his father as a rival.
And then the author takes that a step further and argues that for women, a similar dynamic can play out, where they end up desiring power and control in relationships as adults.
And that's where it starts to get really interesting.
Yeah.
Because then they link it to this concept of penis envy, and they argue that this can drive women to challenge traditional gender rules.
Yeah, they almost make it sound like it disrupts the natural order of things in a way.
Yeah, like it's this deep-seated psychological thing that's messing everything up.
They actually use the term radical ideological possession.
Whoa. Radical ideological possession. Okay, so how does all this tie back to the red pill idea of like societal manipulation?
Well, the book kind of dives into how movements like critical theory and gender studies, you know, those are gaining a lot of traction.
Yeah.
They might actually be exploiting these underlying psychological complexes in women.
Oh, so they're like using these insecurities and stuff to push an agenda.
That's what the book is arguing.
It suggests that they're promoting this victimhood mentality in women.
Right.
You know, framing men as the oppressors, women as the oppressed.
Oh, so it's like they're playing on these pre-existing psychological dynamics to get what they want?
Yeah. And they go after the woke movement, too, saying it's basically brainwashing women into seeing themselves as victims.
Wow. Okay, so we've got these psychological complexes, and then we've got these societal forces that are like feeding off of them.
Right.
But where does the role of fathers fit into all of this?
That's a huge part of their argument.
Yeah, the book really seemed to hone in on that.
Father figures, or the lack thereof, play a massive role in shaping women's psychology and how they relate to men later.
Right.
It's almost like the foundation.
So are they saying that if a woman had a good, strong father figure, she'd be less likely to fall into these traps?
That's essentially it, yeah.
Okay.
A positive, involved father gives a young girl security, stability, helps her develop healthy relationships with men.
Right. But if that's missing,
yeah,
it can create those feelings of insecurity and that desire to dominate.
To compensate.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. Like the father figure really sets the stage for how a woman sees and interacts with men later on.
Totally.
This is where I think some people might get a little uncomfortable, because the book also talks about women's hidden desires, even getting into things like BDSM and rape fantasies.
It's provocative.
Yeah, not exactly dinner table conversation.
Not really.
Especially in the context of feminism.
Right.
But the author ties it back to these same psychological factors.
Yeah, those deep-seated needs for dominance and control, they say are rooted in early childhood.
So they're saying these fantasies are like a natural part of female psychology, but they get suppressed or projected onto men.
Right, and they say that this projection actually contributes to the whole idea of rape culture.
Oh, wow.
Which has spent a lot of time unpacking.
So we've got these psychological complexes.
Societal influence, and even these hidden desires that are supposedly being projected onto men.
It's a lot.
It's starting to feel like a conspiracy theory.
I can see that.
But I gotta admit, it's a compelling narrative.
It's definitely thought-provoking.
Yeah. But we got to remember, this is just one perspective.
Right. It's important to stay critical.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So given all of this, what does the author suggest men do?
Yeah.
Because it's starting to sound like we're trapped in this system.
Well, that's where the book takes a turn.
Okay.
It becomes this call to action for men to reclaim their masculinity, resist the influence of these progressive ideologies that they see as so harmful.
So it's like a guide for men on how to navigate this whole mess.
You could say that they're advocating for embracing those traditional masculine values.
Like what?
Strength, assertiveness, becoming a provider.
Okay.
They say men need to stop apologizing for being men and start embracing their masculinity in a positive way.
This is getting really interesting. I'm definitely eager to hear more about how that plays out in a relationship.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
But I think we've covered a lot of ground in this first part.
We have.
From Oedipus to woke culture to hidden desires.
Yeah, it's a lot to process.
It is, but it's important to lay that foundation.
Right.
Because it informs everything else we're going to talk about.
Exactly. And it gets even more interesting from here.
Well, I can't wait to dive deeper. We'll be back in a flash to explore more of this controversial and thought-provoking book.
Definitely. It's like the deeper we go, the more you see how these societal narratives, they're almost like a form of mental condition.
Yeah, like programming women with certain beliefs about men and relationships.
Exactly. And it happens on multiple levels.
Oh.
It's not just those progressive ideologies. It's the media, even our education system. Wow. They're constantly bombarded with messages that reinforce this whole men are oppressors, women are victims thing.
Right. And it's not just coming from like the fringe feminist groups either.
Nope, it's mainstream too.
So they're being conditioned to see the world through this lens.
Yeah, even if they don't realize it's happening.
And this seems to especially affect how women view sex and relationships.
Yeah, the author has a whole section on rape culture.
Right. That was a pretty controversial part.
Very much so. They argue that the whole concept of rape culture, it's a product of this conditioning.
Oh, wow.
A way to instill fear and suspicion in women, which ultimately benefits the feminist agenda.
So they're saying it's not that men are inherently dangerous, but women are being taught to be afraid of them even when there's no real threat.
That's the argument. They think this fear is based more on misconceptions and stereotypes than actual statistics or real-life experience.
Now, the author is pretty critical of modern feminism.
Sure.
But they do make a distinction between different types, right?
Yeah.
Like, they're not against equality between men and women.
Exactly. They acknowledge that the early waves of feminism, fighting for things like voting rights and equal pay, those had legitimate goals and achieved important victories. But they say things went off the rails with what they call radical feminism, which they see as inherently hostile towards men and disruptive to the natural order.
So they're saying modern feminism has gone too far and is actually hurting both men and women.
That's the conclusion they seem to be drawing, and that's where that call for men to reclaim their masculinity comes in.
Okay.
It's like a necessary pushback against this radical feminist agenda they see as so destructive.
So it's about men reasserting their traditional roles.
Partly, yeah. Provider, protector, those kinds of things. But it's also about rediscovering those core masculine values.
Okay, what specific?
Strength, assertiveness, self-reliance. The author says men need to stop apologizing for being men and embrace their masculinity in a healthy way.
Okay, that makes sense, but how does all this theory actually play out in real life?
Yeah, do they give examples?
Exactly. Like, how are these dynamics affecting relationships?
Oh yeah, they get into specifics about how this is all playing out in modern relationships.
Okay, give me an example. I'm all ears.
Well, one thing they talk about is how women have learned to use their sexuality as a form of manipulation and control.
Whoa, hold on. Are they saying women are intentionally manipulating men?
Not necessarily intentionally, but it's become a deeply ingrained pattern of behavior.
Okay.
They talk about how women use things like clothing, body language, even their tone of voice, to subtly influence men.
To get what they want.
Exactly.
That's a pretty bold statement. I've never thought about it that way.
It's definitely thought-provoking, and they connect it back to those psychological complexes we discussed.
Oh, right, like the Oedipus complex.
Yeah. So maybe men are subconsciously attracted to women who remind them of their mothers, but they also talk about the allure of power and control, the thrill of the forbidden, even societal pressure on men to be submissive to women in certain situations.
Wow, it's like they're trying to decode the entire male-female dynamic, showing all these hidden forces that are shaping our interactions without us even realizing it.
It's pretty ambitious, and they don't stop there.
Okay, where else do they go?
They explore the role of media and popular culture in shaping women's self-perception.
Especially when it comes to body image.
Exactly. They say the media pushes these unrealistic beauty standards, leading to feelings of inadequacy and insecurity, which then gets exploited by the feminist movement.
How so?
By promoting a culture of victimhood and encouraging women to blame men for their perceived shortcomings.
Okay, so we've got psychological complexes, societal narratives, media influence. It's like they're weaving this tapestry to show how these forces are working together to create what they call the hidden face of feminism.
It's complex and multi-layered, for sure.
Yeah.
And while it might be controversial, there's definitely some truth to it.
Yeah, this is making me rethink my own relationships and the dynamics at play.
I get that.
But we've covered a lot, and I'm curious what the author suggests we actually do about all this.
Yeah, they can't just point out the problems without offering solutions.
Exactly. So what's the roadmap? All right, so we've gone through all this stuff, these psychological complexes, the media influence, culture, all that. Now I want to get to the solution.
Yeah, because it's a lot, right?
It's kind of overwhelming, honestly.
The author definitely paints this picture of like society being out of whack, with all these manipulations and hidden contracts causing friction in relationships. But they do offer some pretty solid advice for men trying to navigate all this and for society as a whole.
Okay, so let's start with the advice for men. What do they say we should do to, like, reclaim our masculinity? Break free from these patterns?
Well, self-awareness is huge. They say men need to understand these societal expectations, the messages we've been getting since we were kids,
Right.
and start consciously challenging them.
So it's like recognizing when we're falling into those traps, those scripts society has given us.
Exactly. And then making a choice to step outside of them, be more assertive, set boundaries. Stand up for your needs in relationships.
But how do we do that when those traditional masculine values are seen as, like, toxic or outdated?
Yeah, it's like we're supposed to be more sensitive, more emotional, more like women.
Right.
But the author says there's nothing wrong with those qualities, strength, stoicism, providing for your family, as long as they're expressed in a healthy, balanced way.
So it's not about going back to the caveman days.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It's about finding a way to integrate those traits into a modern context.
Okay, so like finding that balance between traditional and modern masculine and feminine.
Exactly. That sweet spot where you can be strong, but not domineering a provider, but not sacrificing your own needs.
Yeah, like rewriting the script with a new understanding of what it means to be a man today.
I like that. And they also talk about finding the right partner.
Oh yeah, that's huge.
Someone who gets it, who appreciates those healthy masculine.
Because not all women are into that.
Right. You got to find someone who's on the same page, who wants a balanced dynamic.
Okay, so that's the individual level?
Yeah.
What about the bigger picture, like societal change?
The author's big on dialogue, open and honest, even when it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, those tough conversations.
Exactly. Men and women need to share their perspectives, listen to each other, work together.
So breaking down those walls of silence, those taboos.
Right. And education is key, too.
Yeah, okay, both men and women need to be more informed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
About history, psychology, the forces that got us here. Knowledge is power.
Man, this has been a trip. I mean, some of it made me uncomfortable,
Yeah, it's intense.
but it's also made me think about things in a whole new way.
That's what a good book does, right? It challenges you, pushes you out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, for sure. And for anyone who wants to dive deeper into this, the book's available on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
It's a good one.
Definitely worth a read if you want to understand these dynamics better.
It'll stick with you for sure.
Yeah. No, I'm going to be thinking about this for a while.
Yeah.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm just left with this feeling of like, there's no easy answer, but self-awareness, open dialogue,
Yeah.
and challenging the status quo.
Yeah.
It's a good place to start.
For sure.
So until next time, fellow deep divers, keep questioning,
Yeah.
keep exploring, and keep the conversation going.